Hi, I'm Michelle and I'm one of the experiential learning specialists at Skokie Library. Normally you would find me in the BOOMbox or the youth lab, but today I'm at home just like everyone else in Skokie. I'm really excited to join you today to show you how to make your own sculpting clay and how to make a sculpture out of it. If you already have Play-Doh or sculpting clay at home, you can skip this step and go straight to making your own sculpture. But if you don't have any, we're going to make some right now with stuff that you can find in your own kitchen. I found a recipe on the PBS website, which I've linked in the BOOMbox at home blog post. This recipe makes a lot of sculpting clay, so I've divided it up by 4 to make a smaller amount. So to make sculpting clay, you will need 1 cup of plain white flour. So we get 1 cup here. Let's see if I can scoop this all out. Get 1 cup. That looks like that's about 1 cup. Yep. And then you will need 1/4 cup of water. So I've got that there. I'm going to pour in some water. That looks like 1/4 cup. And then you need 1/3 of a cup of salt. Pouring it in. 1/3 of a cup. Looks like it. And then you will also need 1 tablespoon of cooking oil. So I've got a tablespoon here and some cooking oil here. Pour it in. There we go. And if you have food coloring that's in a little dropper bottle, you can add a drop of that to the water first and mix it up. Now I'm going to put everything into this mixer bowl. I have to be really careful with the flour because it can get really messy. So in goes water first, and then the flour, being careful of course, because if it gets everywhere you'll get a dust cloud. And the salt. And the oil. Now, I'm going to mix it all together. So, normal clay, like what's used to make this bowl here, is made out of lots of tiny pieces of rock suspended in water. So the tiny rocks are all of different sizes. There are some slightly bigger rocks that help make the clay stronger, and there are even smaller rocks that fit in between the bigger rocks, and they help make the clay stretchy and flexible. And when the clay is fired in the kiln, which is a really, really hot oven, it gets up to really high temperatures, the tiny pieces of rock melt and they fuse together, which makes the bowl hard. This sculpting clay is a little bit different. It's more like Play-Doh, and by mixing everything together, we are suspending the flour particles in water. But flour's not like rock. Instead of being made of minerals, it's made of starches and proteins. So what's happening at the molecular level is that the water is activating the gluten proteins in the flour to make the clay stretchy. And on the other hand, we've also added a little bit of salt. Salt is a mineral called sodium chloride. The salt acts like tiny pieces of rock here. It makes the texture of the clay feel a bit nicer to touch, and it makes it a bit stronger. We've also added in cooking oil. This acts as a lubricant, which means that it makes things slippery. It stops the clay from being too sticky or too dry. So I'm going to get with my hands and start kneading the clay to get it to stick all together. So once you've finished mixing and kneading your clay, you should have something that looks a bit like this. You can't eat it. The flour is still raw and it might make you sick. And the salt tastes really horrible too, but you can make art with it. Now, what should I make with this clay? Let's brainstorm some ideas. Do you have a favorite sculpture in Skokie? Think about the sculptures along the sculpture park next to the river, or the sculptures along the valley trail, or even the sculptures that are in front of the library. So I'm going to be making Gordnan. This sculpture is on the village green that's right between the village hall and the library. And it's a bunch of round heads stacked up on top of each other. And the top one is shaped a little bit like a bottle gourd. And if you can see, you've got some faces that are smiling, some faces that are smiling with teeth, and some faces that have dimples, and some faces, I don't know if you can see, but they're sticking their tongues out. So to make that sculpture, I'll need to make a bunch of round heads and a pair of shoulders. The smallest round head will be on top, and it will be shaped a bit like a bottle. So do you think this sculpture has a meaning? Well, the bottle gourd is a lot different to other gourds that we know of, like squash, melons, and cucumbers. It has a very thick, hard skin, and in some countries, bottle gourds are dried out and they're used as, can you guess? Bottles. And so they can be used to make things like containers that carry water, beans, rice, medicine. But they can also be used to make music instruments. I'm going to try and make a face in this, but I have to make ears too. So little ears. So this sculpture was made by an artist named Sheng Shu. He works at Northeastern Illinois University, but he grew up in China. Bottle gourds pop up a lot in Chinese art, and they have meanings like good luck, safety, and happiness. And when something happens a lot in art, like a pattern, it's called a motif. Something else that happens a lot in Chinese art are these round faces, like smiley round faces. And to me, these round faces look a lot like Happy Buddha. The Happy Buddha was this monk who lived more than 1,000 years ago. He had lots of food and he shared his food with children and poor people around him. So if you look at artwork of Happy Buddha, he's always smiling and laughing. And to me, and to a lot of people say that the Happy Buddha means happiness, good luck, and having lots of things. Okay, let's see if I can put dimples in this guy. There you go. That's the next head. So if I think about these two things, the meaning of a bottle gourd and the meaning of the Happy Buddha, I think that the Gordman sculpture means happiness and good luck. And I think that's a really nice thing to have in front of the library. Of course, this is just what I think, it's just me guessing. And so you might have a different idea of what the Gordman sculpture really means. So this is going to be my last head. I'm trying to make it look a little bit like a gourd, like a tiny little pumpkin. And I have to put a face in it too. That's good. Put a face in here. Alright, and now that goes on top. And hopefully it doesn't fall over, because this is getting tall now. It is going to fall over maybe. Oh, there we go. Do you think I managed to make my sculpture look like Gordman? You know, oh no. It's fallen over. We'll have it as separate heads then. Or maybe I can use a stick to hold it all together. Let's try doing that. I'm going to put a stick in to hold it all together. And maybe that'll work. There we go. Do you think my sculpture looks like God, man? You know, I want to see what you've been making. Once you've made your sculpture, take a photo, tag at Skokie Library when you share the photo that you've created on social media. So if you want to keep your sculpting clay soft and squishy, remember to put it in a plastic bag or a container so it doesn't dry out in the air. And if you want to keep your sculpture that you've made, you can put it on the windowsill for it to dry out, and then you'll have your own personal piece of art. And thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed displaying your sculpture around your home. For more information about art, see our blog post on BOOMbox at Home Activities. And as we say in the BOOMbox, what will you learn today?